The older woman stepped out of the courthouse in silence, her silver hair pinned neatly, her eyes calm, not cold, just finished. She didn't shout. She didn't slam doors. But that morning, 3 certified letters were hand-delivered to a house she once helped build. Inside a clause, a correction and the consequences of being underestimated. No warning, no second chances, just legacy reclaimed one signature at a time. Welcome to Grandma Revenge, silent. Today we unveil the story of a quiet matriarch they tried to erase, until she reminded them whose name was still on the deed. Helen Whitmore stood on the front porch of her son's craftsman home in Boulder, Colorado, balancing a lemon tart wrapped in parchment and tied with twine. She'd baked it early that morning, Nathan's favorite, and even though it was a simple gesture, it carried more weight than it appeared. The air was crisp, the sun warm against her cardigan, and the scent of lavender from Sierra's neglected flower beds still lingered faintly. She knocked twice, waited nothing. Then she knocked again, more softly. This time her other hand adjusting the ribbon on the tart like that might make it more welcome. No one came. She set the tart down gently on the porch bench and turned back to her car. Halfway down the path, her phone buzzed, a notification from Instagram. Curious, she tapped it open and paused. Sierra's profile had just uploaded a photo. A filtered brunch table glowed golden in soft light. Avocado toast, mimosas, laughter. The caption, Sunday family style, nothing better. Helen's smile faded. She zoomed in. There was Nathan laughing mid-chew, Sierra radiant in a crisp white blouse, her cousin Gina visibly pregnant holding a mimosa, and her belly like matching accessories. Everyone was there. Everyone but her. Helen sat in her parked car for a long while watching her screen as if it might correct itself. A month ago she'd offered to help shop for the nursery. Sierra's response had been a polite but pointed, "Thanks, we've got it covered." After that, their replies to her texts became shorter, more clipped, stripped of the warmth that once lingered even in punctuation. Now there were no responses at all. She opened her messages with Nathan. The last one she'd sent still sat unread from 2 days ago. "Just checking if you received the blanket I left at the door. It was from my mother's Hope, chest, handmade." Took weeks. She hovered over the send arrow, sighed and pressed it anyway. Then she drove home in silence. That evening, she placed a note in a basket next to another lemon loaf, her second one that week, and drove it to their house again. She didn't ring the bell. She just left it on the porch. "Thought you might need something sweet this week? Love, Mom." Later that night, her phone buzzed. Her heart fluttered until she saw the name Sierra. "Please don't drop things by anymore. It makes things uncomfortable for everyone." "No, thank you. No, we're busy." Just another boundary drawn, not with kindness, but with cold efficiency. A digital wall. Helen read the message 3 times. Then wordlessly, she opened the hallway closet and pulled out a leather-bound folder. She carried it to her desk, like someone carrying a forgotten photograph, something once treasured but long since ignored. She opened her laptop. The bookmark tab she hadn't clicked in years blinked to life. Robinson and Wolf Legal Services. A chat window popped up. "Helen," her lawyer, Bernard, typed. "Didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "I need to revise my will," she typed back. He paused. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she wrote quietly. "No alerts, no notifications. Just remove some names." He didn't press further. "I'll send the secure form." Helen's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "Don't add anyone yet," she added. "Let's see who earns it." She closed the chat. In the kitchen, the lemon loaf sat untouched, still warm beneath the parchment. She cut a slice, bit in, slightly over-baked dry at the edges, but not the worst thing she'd had to swallow that day. As she rinsed her plate, another buzz, this time an Instagram story. Sierra again. Helen opened it. A photo of a pale pink envelope embossed with gold script, "Your invited baby shower for Sierra and baby W." The caption, "Can't wait to celebrate with our people, family only." Helen didn't receive an invitation. She stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she stepped out onto her front porch and stood beneath the soft glow of the porch light. The wind had picked up. A few leaves rustled past her feet, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked once and then fell quiet. She looked up at the stars, old distant patient, and whispered not with anger but with the resolve of someone who had just remembered what she was worth. They thought silence meant surrender. They forgot the quietest person in the room is often the one who's already 10 steps ahead. Helen stared at the file in her hands, the same manila folder she hadn't opened since the day Nathan and Sierra first toured the house on Elm Hollow Road. Back then they were wide-eyed and overwhelmed, young, married barely 6 months, panicked by mortgage rates and repair quotes. Helen remembered how they stood in her kitchen one night, eyes glassy with exhaustion, talking about giving up on the idea of a home altogether. She remembered how she made tea, how she sat across from them at the table, and how without ceremony she slid a piece of paper across the wood. A cashier's check, $100,000. "It's from your father's life insurance," she'd said softly. "Use it, build something." Nathan had choked up. Sierra had blinked twice before saying, "We'll pay it back." Helen didn't press. She only asked that they add one clause to the deed, 30% ownership in her name, until the day the down payment was repaid in full. It was just a technicality. They agreed without hesitation, and then over time they seemed to forget. Now Helen flipped through the pages again, her fingers pausing over the clause. Helen R. Whitmore retains 30% interest in the property at 1427 Elm Hollow Road until such time as full repayment of initial capital contribution is made. No repayment had ever come, not in cash, not in acknowledgement, and lately not even in kindness. The next morning she picked up the phone and called her son. "Hi, Mom." Nathan said casually, like he hadn't been dodging her messages. "What's up, Helen?" Hesitated, then asked, "I stopped by yesterday. Sierra said I should text first before visiting." "A beat." "Yeah," Nathan said awkwardly. "It's just been a bit hectic with the pregnancy, trying to keep things calm." Helen nodded, even though he couldn't see. "I also wanted to ask something," she added. "That house deed, my name's still on it, right?" Silence longer this time. "I think so," Nathan replied, cautious. "But it's just like a technicality, It doesn't mean anything." "No," Helen said, her voice steady. "Explain it to me." Nathan exhaled. "You helped us start, but it's our home now. I mean, you live in your own place. You've never really used the house." Helen's jaw tightened. Our home. That was the word. Not your home, not shared. Hers had been erased subtly but deliberately from the narrative. That night she met with her attorney, Bernard Mason, in his downtown office, a narrow, warm room with oak-paneled walls and a faint scent of dust and coffee. Bernard adjusted his glasses, flipped through the paperwork, and nodded. "This clause is still enforceable," he said, tapping it. "They never bought you out. No amendments filed, no payment records. Technically, you're a co-owner. Not a silent one either." Helen leaned back in the chair. "So I could block renovations or refinancing." "You'd be within your rights," he confirmed. "Any major move involving the house would require your legal consent." Helen smiled, small, sharp. "They think I'm overstepping, but I haven't even started walking." Back at home, curiosity nudged her toward Zillow. She typed in the address. Sure enough, there it was, a recently saved listing under Sierra's name. Flip potential mid-year remodel budget, $150,000. Helen blinked. They weren't just living in her house. They were planning to flip it, profit off it without telling her. That same evening, Helen received an unexpected phone call from an old friend, Marjorie, who worked in accounting at a local wellness center. Her tone was hesitant but firm. "Helen, I overheard something today." Sierra's name came up. "She's been transferring funds monthly into a shell company, spa-related. But the funny thing is, the corporate paperwork links back to your family trust." Helen's heart dropped. Her trust, her name, her money, all being used behind her back. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling me." She didn't sleep much that night, but in the early hours of the morning, she began organizing every receipt, transfer slip, and communication she'd ever kept regarding her financial support for Nathan and Sierra. It wasn't just the house. There had been the wedding, the down payment on their second car, Sierra's so-called wellness retreat last year that cost over $8,000, all of it silently covered by Helen, all written off as love, as loyalty. Now those quiet contributions were evidence. She poured a cup of coffee and sat down with her leather-bound notebook. On a clean page, she began listing them line by line. Wedding gift, $25,000. Baby fund, $10,000. Car deposit, $12,000. Down payment, $100,000. Emotional cost, still compounding. By the time the sun crept across her front lawn, Helen had finished the first page. She closed the notebook, placed it atop the legal folder, and whispered to no one in particular, "If they want to treat me like a bank, then I'll start acting like one." They'd taken her kindness for granted, but what they didn't know was that Helen wasn't the kind of woman to disappear quietly. She was the kind of woman who kept the receipts. Helen always believed betrayal came in whispers, not explosions. So when the first real crack showed, it wasn't in the form of a screaming match or slammed door. It came through a rumor passed like a warm dish over coffee. A neighbor named June, the kind who always walked her dog just a little slower past Helen's rose bushes, casually mentioned seeing Sierra at the Willoughby Inn, a local boutique hotel, not with Nathan, with someone else. He was tall, younger, June said, pretending to tighten her leash. Wore those fitted suits you don't see outside. City lawyers. They looked cozy. Helen didn't respond. She smiled politely and tucked the information away like a paper cut, small but stinging enough to remember. That night she logged into her anonymous account, the one her attorney Bernard had helped her create when the family trust first came under scrutiny. A few searches and a soft click later, she was staring at a public Instagram post from the Willoughby Inn's official account. A couple's wine tasting event, candlelight small tables paired tastings. In the background of one carefully composed photo, Helen spotted Sierra. Her hand rested on the arm of a man who was decidedly not her son. His head was turned mid-laugh. Sierra's expression was different from the tight, performative smiles she reserved for family photos. She looked relaxed, happy, emboldened. Helen zoomed in until the pixels blurred. That necklace, Sierra was wearing it. Her mother's necklace, the 1930s Art Deco platinum piece with 3 diamonds Helen's own mother had worn at her wedding. The one she had gifted Sierra just before her bridal shower with shaking hands and a small, trembling hope. "I want you to have this," Helen had said, then sliding the velvet box across the table. "To wear when you need to feel like a woman who knows her worth." Sierra had smiled a flash of polished teeth and practiced gratitude and said, "It's beautiful. Is it real?" The moment stuck like an unfinished sentence. Now 2 years later, Helen's fingers hovered over her laptop as she traced the faint outline of the necklace's clasp. There barely visible was the engraving HRW Helen Rose, Whitmore Custom Unmistakable. Her stomach turned. That necklace wasn't for resale. It wasn't for a date at a hotel bar with a man she hadn't married. It was legacy, worn in betrayal. That same week, Helen reached out to her jeweler in Dallas, the same man who'd done the custom engraving, and asked if any similar pieces had passed through his consignment contacts. 3 days later, her phone lit up with a message and a link. Platinum Deco diamond necklace, circa 1930s, certificate of authenticity included, resale. Value $6,800. Helen clicked. There it was. The same piece, same clasp, same cold diamonds that once caught sunlight through her mother's veil. She didn't cry. She clicked buy now under a corporate LLC. 2 days later, the package arrived in discreet cream wrapping. No note, no apology. Just a return of what should never have left. That evening, Helen sat alone at her kitchen table, her hand brushing the velvet pouch, the diamonds catching the fading light like they remembered what they once meant. She didn't put it back on. Instead, she repackaged it. No necklace inside this time. Just a folded card placed into an identical gift box to the one she'd used before. The card read simply, "Careful what you lose." No name, no return address. The next morning, she paid a private courier to deliver the box to 1427 Elm Hollow Road. She requested the delivery happen mid-morning when she knew Sierra would be home alone. Later that day, Helen received a text from a friend down the street. "Your box arrived." Ring camera caught her face. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Helen didn't reply. She didn't need to. That night, Nathan called. She let it go to voicemail. "Mom, Sierra got this weird package today. Did you never mind? Look, can we just talk?" Helen listened, then deleted the message. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. The pain had passed. What remained was purpose. In the days that followed, Helen didn't idle. She called Bernard and said, "I want to initiate a full audit of the trust. Everything tied to my name. Every transfer, every document Sierra's ever signed." Bernard didn't ask why. He already knew. "Let's bring in someone new to assist," he said. Someone with no prior connection to Nathan or Sierra. Helen agreed. The next day, she met Rachel Winters, a 30-something estate litigation consultant who recently relocated from Chicago. Rachel was sharp-focused and quiet in the way that made people underestimate her. Perfect. Helen liked her immediately. Over chamomile tea, Rachel opened a folder and said, "Your daughter-in-law's shell company isn't just tied to your trust. She's been claiming income allocations under your social security number." Helen didn't flinch. She leaned back and said, "Then we stop being nice." Rachel nodded, her eyes scanning documents, "And we start being exact." Helen poured more tea, the warmth of the cup steady in her hands. Betrayal, she had learned, didn't always come with shouting. Sometimes it came with spa invoices, misfiled tax statements, and date night selfies. But just as Helen decided, would come in silence, signed, sealed, delivered, and Sierra. She had just lit the match that would set her world on fire. By the time Sierra realized something was off, the walls were already moving in. The first sign came with a declined card, her go-to Amex, the one she used without thought for grocery deliveries and silk maternity dresses, suddenly rejected during a high-end prenatal spa appointment. She blamed the terminal, then the network, then the assistant. But that evening when she tried to order a wine subscription gift box, sparkling juices only, of course the transaction failed again. This time the error message said, "Account frozen pending verification." She stormed through the house, phone in hand, demanding to know if Nathan had done something stupid. Nathan, fresh off a 12-hour shift at the hospital, stared at her with confused exhaustion. "What are you talking about?" he asked. "Why would I touch your card?" Sierra narrowed her eyes, then pivoted, muttering something about calling the bank herself. "The conversation with the bank's fraud department didn't go the way she wanted, ma'am. We're seeing inconsistencies tied to the original account holder's documentation," the rep said politely. "Due to a recent administrative change, your access has been restricted until ownership can be verified." Sierra's voice dropped into a sharp whisper laced with panic. "There is no other account holder. This is my card. I've used it for years." The rep was calm, clinical. "We have on file that the root trust behind this account was created by Helen Whitmore. It appears her access and control were recently reinstated." Silence hung in the air. Sierra's throat tightened. She ended the call without saying goodbye. The next blow came via email, a legal document with sharp headers and emotionless language. "Notice of potential asset reclamation from the office of Helen R. Whitmore, filed by R. Winters and Associates." The list of financial contributions read like a sting. Down payment, $110,000, vehicle fund, $1,400 prenatal medical support, $6,500 trust distribution to joint spousal account, $35,000. At the bottom, a footnote in precise font, documentation to support claims enclosed. Review pending for reimbursement under estate protective clauses. Sierra's hands shook. It wasn't a request. It was a shot across the bow. She waited until Nathan was in the shower before unlocking her backup phone, the one she thought she had hidden well enough. In truth, Helen already knew. The audits had traced the phone to several private hotel reservations, but Sierra didn't suspect she'd been exposed yet. She called Ethan, the other man, the real estate consultant she'd met at a charity dinner 2 years ago. "I need to talk," she whispered. "I think she's onto us." Ethan was nonchalant. "Who, the old lady?" "Come on, she's what, 70? What's she gonna do, repossess the couch?" Sierra wasn't laughing. "She's freezing accounts, pulling legal files. She bought back the necklace." Ethan paused. "Wait, what necklace? The one I sold?" Sierra's voice dropped. "The one she gave me before the wedding. She must have tracked it down, and now she's circling us like a hawk." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Well, maybe you shouldn't have sold the damn thing," Sierra snapped. "You think I need a lecture right now?" But the line was already dead. Across town, Helen sat in Rachel's quiet office, going over trust clauses and updated beneficiaries. The air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and copier ink. "She's starting to panic," Rachel said, glancing at her screen. "There's a series of small wire attempts, all denied." Helen didn't smile. She didn't gloat. Instead, she asked, "What about the shell company tied to my social security number?" Rachel tapped a few keys. "Registered in Delaware Spa, Wellness Umbrella. We've got enough to build a fraud case if needed." Helen nodded. "Start documenting everything. Emails, timestamps, transactions. I want a paper trail strong enough to hold in court if this gets ugly." Rachel looked at her curiously. "Are you hoping for a confrontation?" Helen's voice was steady. "No, I'm preparing for one." The next morning, Helen dropped by the old house. Her name still on the deed. She brought a lemon loaf wrapped in parchment just like she used to. Sierra opened the door and blinked. "Helen," she said, forcing a grin. "This is a surprise." Helen held out the loaf. "Thought you might want something sweet for the baby." Sierra hesitated. "Thanks, but maybe give us a heads up next time before stopping by. We're really trying to create boundaries." Helen's gaze didn't flinch. "You're standing in a house I co-own. Boundaries go both ways." For a moment, the air between them crackled with unsaid things. Sierra took the loaf, forced another smile, and closed the door without inviting her in. That night, Helen returned home and opened the folder marked "Personal Contingency" inside, were photos not just of the necklace or bank records, but screenshots of social posts, time-stamped receipts, hotel bills under aliases, and a background report Bernard had discreetly compiled on Ethan Marlowe. Sierra's affair wasn't speculation. It was an outline, a structure, a sequence of deceit. Helen exhaled slowly. Betrayal was bitter, but clarity That was empowering. She drafted a second legal document, preliminary filing for trust misuse and familial disinheritance review. It was clinical formal, but it carried the weight of thunder behind its calm. As she signed her name at the bottom, Helen looked at the framed photo of Nathan as a boy on her mantel. His smile was toothy and unguarded. It hurt knowing he'd grown into someone who could stand beside this level of cruelty and call it family. But love, she had learned, didn't mean enabling. It meant boundaries with teeth, and this time they would bite. Helen sat at her desk beneath the soft morning light filtering through linen curtains. Her coffee untouched, her thoughts sharper than the steam curling from the cup. The quiet hum of her neighborhood outside was a far cry from the storm she was preparing to unleash. No longer was this about disappointment. It had become about legacy. She wasn't trying to teach Sierra a lesson anymore. She was reclaiming what had been quietly siphoned from her life by manipulation and entitlement. With every silent step they took to erase her, blocking her number, selling her heirlooms, forging new boundaries that excluded her, Helen had been writing a new doctrine of control, line by line, asset by asset. That afternoon, she met with Dana Greer, a senior advisor at Briarstone Wealth Planning, a woman whose gray suit and crimson nails matched her reputation for legal precision. Helen slid a folder across the polished oak table. "I'm done watching them stumble over boundaries they created with contempt. I want control quietly, but completely." Dana scanned the documents, nodding. "You've liquidated enough assets to restructure the entire estate. What are you envisioning?" Helen exhaled. "A firewall. I want a trust that outlives me but answers only to its values. No loopholes, no loophole chasers." Dana leaned in, intrigued, and the beneficiaries. Helen's voice was even, not them. Not unless they rebuild from the ruins they caused. She handed over a sealed envelope. "Claire Whitman, single mom, hospice nurse, daughter of the only woman I ever trusted like a sister. She remembers the value of every dollar she never expected. She's earned this." And Tess Campbell. Yes, that Tess used to be Sierra's best friend. Sierra dropped her over something petty. Tess stood by me when she didn't have to. Dana didn't flinch. "We'll get the documents drafted and filed. Revocable or irrevocable?" "Irrevocable," Helen said without hesitation, "and include a no contest clause. If Nathan or Sierra so much as breathe the word challenge, they forfeit everything." That night, the legal gears turned with icy grace. Rachel forwarded notarized forms for Helen's review: asset, reassignment, healthcare proxy changes, trust, realignment. By midnight, the last signature dried beneath Helen's pen. A script steadied by clarity, not rage. Across town, Sierra posted another carefully curated Instagram story, her glowing silhouette beneath fairy lights captioned, "Building something beautiful even when the roots are broken." Helen scoffed. The real building was happening in silence, in scanned PDFs and asset verification reports, not in photo filters and passive-aggressive quotes. 3 days later, Sierra attempted to access the emergency fund again. This time, the login error read, "Access denied, account terminated." When the bank followed up with a verification call, the number on file redirected to Helen's estate attorney. Within hours, Rachel texted Helen. She tried to reroute the withdrawal to a shell LLC. "We caught it in time. Funds remain secure." Helen replied with a single word: "Perfect." Meanwhile, Nathan, still believing things could be salvaged, called his mother, not to reconcile but to negotiate. "Mom, we need to talk," he said. When she answered, his voice strained. "I'm not trying to take sides, but things are tense. Sierra's been upset. Maybe we could meet halfway." Helen's tone was patient but steeled. "You don't meet halfway when someone burns your end of the bridge." Nathan sighed, clearly thrown by her conviction. "Can't we talk this out like family?" Helen let the silence linger before answering. "Family talks. Family protects. Family doesn't take what was handed with love and turn it into leverage. When you watched Sierra sell my necklace and said nothing, when you let her lie about money and shut me out of my grandchild's life, you became something else. You became comfortable, and comfort never saved anyone from consequence." That evening, a courier delivered the formal notice to the Forest Pines house. Sierra opened it while wearing a silk robe she hadn't paid for, standing barefoot in the kitchen. She had tried to remodel using trust funds. The bold header at the top read, "Intent to reclaim shared property. Notice of legal hold, pending full reconciliation." Her face went pale. Nathan read over her shoulder and quietly walked away without a word. But Helen didn't stop there. She emailed a formal statement to the family accountant, revoking all financial powers previously granted to Nathan. She appointed Tess as her healthcare proxy. and Claire as the emergency executor of the estate. That same day, she made a quiet donation, $50,000, to a local women's legal advocacy fund under Claire's name. It wasn't revenge, it was redirection. Every dollar that would have gone to empty brunches and Instagram fantasies now flowed to people who understood struggle and respected legacy. By the end of the week, Helen had stripped every document of Nathan and Sierra's names, titles, proxies, insurance, even emergency contacts, all done quietly, all filed legally. No screaming, no spectacle, just a series of signatures notarized and irreversible. They thought they were removing her from their lives. They didn't realize she'd been rewriting the story in ink, not pencil. And on Friday evening, while Sierra posted another filtered photo of her tranquil nesting sanctuary, the power was cut for non-payment. The lights went out, and the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was deafening. Across town, Helen poured herself a glass of Malbec, sat on her balcony and looked at the stars. Legacy wasn't just about inheritance. It was about who you trusted to carry your name without dragging it through the mud. And in that moment, she felt the deepest peace she'd known in years. Not because she'd won, but because she'd let go. The orchid in Helen's sunroom had just begun to bloom again when her phone buzzed with a single voicemail notification. She rarely received calls anymore, and certainly not from Nathan. The message had come in at 11:03 p.m., a late hour that hinted at recklessness or desperation. With cautious fingers, Helen tapped to play it. What followed wasn't her son's voice, but Sierra's sharp and unfiltered, unaware she was being recorded. "I swear to God," Sierra was saying, "if Helen mentions one more time that she helped us buy this house, I'll scream. She thinks she's the queen of everything just because she's old and knows how to write a check." There was a clinking of glass, maybe wine, maybe scotch. Then came Nathan's hesitant chuckle, followed by, "I mean, I love her, but yeah, she's been intense lately." Sierra's voice curled with disdain. "Intense, no controlling, and completely irrelevant. We're building our lives. Why is she still in the picture?" A pause. Then the line that struck Helen in the chest like a cold dagger. "Old people like her shouldn't control that much money. They don't know how the world works anymore." The message ended in laughter, hers then his. Helen didn't cry. She didn't gasp or shake. Instead, she quietly hit replay, then again recording it on her own phone the third time, storing it as evidence, not just for courtrooms, but for clarity. That morning, she returned to Dana Greer's office. The estate planner listened as Helen played the voicemail, her lips tightening with every second. When it ended, Dana didn't speak for a moment, then coolly she asked, "Do you want to go nuclear?" Helen's eyes met hers. "No," she said. "I want to go invisible strategic. I want them to feel the absence before they understand its weight." The next step came quietly. With Dana's help, Helen established a private family trust labeled the Whitman Initiative, named not after blood, but after Claire, the woman who reminded Helen of everything she used to believe family meant. The trust was irrevocable, fortified with layers of financial shielding and managed by a third-party fiduciary. All contributions that had been siphoned to Sierra and Nathan's lifestyle mortgage supplements, emergency fund access, even the co-signed loan for Sierra's wellness brand were documented, reallocated, and locked. Nothing would be withdrawn without direct authorization from Helen or her legal proxy, which as of that morning was no longer her son. Meanwhile, back at Forest Pines, Sierra was preparing for her second family-only baby shower, a curated brunch event intended for optics more than intimacy. She'd handpicked every guest, every menu detail, even the playlist. But the one detail she overlooked was Helen's knowledge of the venue, courtesy of a mutual acquaintance. Helen didn't show up to crash it, no. She had something more subtle in mind. When the photos from the event went live on social media later that day, they were filled with pink balloons, sparkling cider, and smiling faces. Helen wasn't in a single picture, but she was in the background of one framed photo on the mantel behind the party, captured by accident. A family portrait from years ago, where she had held baby Nathan in her arms. The irony wasn't lost on her. Later that evening, Tess forwarded her a screenshot of a private Instagram story Sierra had posted just hours after the shower. White text on a soft pink background overlaid with hashtags like "boundaries matter" and "generational healing." The quote read, "If they remind you how much they've done for you, they didn't do it from love. They did it from control." Helen almost smiled. This wasn't just erasure, it was revisionist history. And now she was ready to respond, but not with posts or texts, with paper. The following morning, Helen assembled a ledger, not for herself, but for the record. Every dollar, every check, every loan. The wedding gift $25,000, the baby fund $10,000, the mortgage down payment $100,000, the necklace her mother's Art Deco platinum heirloom, priceless, but later appraised at $6,800 sold for spa recovery. She added one more line, emotional costs still compounding. Then she signed it, dated it, and placed it at the back of her legal file labeled Legacy. Meanwhile, Dana had uncovered something far more troubling. Sierra's been transferring funds from the joint emergency account to a Shell LLC registered under your name. She said one afternoon during a call, "It's fraud, Helen. She's forging your identity to funnel money." Helen didn't gasp. She simply answered, "Then we stop playing nice." Within 48 hours, Dana filed a formal complaint with the State Financial Ethics Board. The trust's legal team issued a cease and desist to Sierra's LLC, froze the account, and began an audit. When the bank notified Sierra of the hold, she called Helen in a panic. Helen didn't answer. She let it go to voicemail. Sierra's voice cracked with fear this time. "I don't know what you think I did, but you're hurting your son. You're punishing your future grandchild." The call ended without apology, just blame. That night, Helen sat at her desk with the window open, the wind carrying in the scent of rosemary and pine. She didn't feel victorious. She felt awake. She had been underestimated not because of what she lacked, but because of what they assumed she wouldn't do. But the woman who once baked pies in silence had now learned how to build shields from signatures. The family she once gave everything to had mistaken kindness for weakness, and now she was teaching them the final lesson, that silence when chosen is not absence, it is power. The morning sun filtered through Helen's lace curtains, casting delicate shadows across her kitchen floor. But her focus was fixed on the sleek envelope in her hand. Dana had just sent over the final draft of the estate amendment, and with each page, Helen reviewed the air around her, grew still like it understood something irreversible was about to happen. The document, now embossed and official, read, "Last Will and Testament of Helen Marie Whitman." In bold beneath it, a new name was etched as primary heir. Claire Thomas, registered, nurse daughter of Helen's late best friend, and the one person who had checked in weekly not out of obligation but sincerity. The clause that followed was one Dana had insisted on for protection, the no contest clause. If Nathan or Sierra attempted to dispute the new terms, they'd be disqualified entirely. No partial settlements, no loopholes, just a clean severance. Helen didn't hesitate. She signed with a smooth, deliberate curve of her pen, the same pen she once used to write Nathan's birth announcements. The ink dried slowly, but with it decades of guilt lifted. Across town, Sierra was unraveling. The mortgage had bounced, their credit card was frozen, and an unexpected IRS notice had arrived questioning deductions from the so-called wellness business. The pressure cracked her carefully curated life. She tried to post a passive-aggressive story on Instagram, a soft pink graphic that read, "Some people gift guilt and call it love." But within hours, Tess commented publicly, "You mean the same person whose necklace you pawned for a massage retreat?" The post was deleted, but not before it was screenshotted and shared in multiple private Facebook groups, including one for local mothers where the backlash was immediate and brutal. Helen didn't post a single word. She didn't need to. Her paper trail was louder than any hashtag. At Forest Pines, Sierra opened the door one rainy morning to find a uniformed courier standing on the porch. "Signature required," he said, handing over a manila envelope stamped with the insignia of Whitman Legal Advisory Group. The moment she closed the door, she tore it open. Inside, formal documentation of a trust audit, a legal notice of financial severance, and a forensic breakdown of all contributions Helen had made to their household over the past decade. Every gift, every loan, every unacknowledged act of support. At the bottom, a sentence printed in crisp serif: reimbursement, pending formal review and ethical conduct compliance. Sierra stood still, rainwater dripping from her hair onto the tiled floor, the document trembling in her hand. For the first time, her silence wasn't performative. It was stunned. Meanwhile, Helen was finalizing another quiet move. The small coastal cottage her own mother had once left behind, modest, weathered, but nestled in a breathtaking bluff in northern Oregon, had just gone on the market. But Helen didn't list it publicly. Instead, she sold it off-market to a nonprofit focused on transitional housing for single mothers. The deal closed in 5 days, cash wired straight into the newly fortified trust, under the name The Quiet Foundation, overseen by Claire and set up to offer scholarships, emergency grants, and legal aid to women whose voices had been dismissed in the name of family harmony. Dana emailed her with a gentle note, "This move will outlive their noise." Helen smiled. "Nathan, for all his reluctance, was finally beginning to see the wreckage he had let unfold. He showed up at Helen's door one gray evening holding a wrinkled envelope. "I just want to talk," he said. Helen didn't let him inside. She stepped onto the porch and stood beneath the overhang, her cardigan drawn tight. "You watched her erase me," she said softly. "And then you helped her write the ending." He looked down, shame flooding his face. "I didn't know how far it would go," he said. "I thought you'd always be there." Helen didn't reply. She reached for the envelope and found inside a letter. Halting. Apologies, stammered regret, and a line that tried too late to bridge the damage. "I just want our family back." Helen folded it neatly, slipped it into her coat pocket, and answered, "Then you should have fought for it when it still existed." That night, Sierra made one final attempt to regain control. She filed a request to refinance the house in her name, only using falsified income documentation and referencing the equity as unencumbered, but the bank, now on alert due to the ongoing audit, flagged the request immediately and forwarded it to Helen's legal team. Within 48 hours, a formal injunction was placed on the property, freezing all transactions. Dana forwarded the email to Helen with one line, "Blocked like your number used to be." Back at home, Helen pulled out an old photo album, not out of nostalgia, but to remind herself of the woman she had once been. Present, generous, invisible by choice. Now that woman had returned, but this time with boundaries made of steel and proof. She was no longer trying to be welcomed. She was ensuring she'd never be dismissed again. And the world that had once turned its back was now being forced to face her. Not through pleading, but through process. The sound of justice was never loud. It echoed in paperwork and policies and permanence. The world didn't need Helen to raise her voice. Sierra did that for her. 2 weeks after the injunction froze all refinancing activity on the house, Sierra uploaded a teary, unfiltered video to her social media with the caption, "When toxic family takes everything you built." Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she sniffled into the camera, painting herself as the victim of a controlling, narcissistic mother-in-law who had destroyed her peace, her finances, and her future. She spoke of boundaries, of emotional abuse, of how she and Nathan were being punished for simply wanting independence. But the internet, once her audience of blind affirmation, had changed. Comments poured in, and many weren't kind. One user linked to the estate documents that had mysteriously leaked online. Another quoted Helen's old Facebook post about generosity without acknowledgement. The top comment read, "Funny how independence only matters after the money's gone." Tess, once her best friend and now her sharpest critic, reposted the video with one quiet sentence. "Some inherit money, some inherit grace. You chose neither." Sierra deleted the video within hours, but the algorithm had already worked its magic. It was stitched, shared, dissected, turned into reaction memes, and uploaded to YouTube under the title "Trust Fund Tantrum." Nathan, meanwhile, had gone quiet. The pressure of lost status, mounting debt, and a crumbling marriage finally cracked through his protective detachment. He reached out to Dana, not Helen, hoping for a second chance, an amendment to the trust, even a conditional reinstatement. Dana declined to meet, and her assistant sent a carefully worded response. "At this time, the trust has been restructured. All previous beneficiaries removed are no longer eligible under the no contest clause. Thank you for your inquiry." The silence that followed was louder than any courtroom verdict. That same week, the final mortgage notice arrived. It wasn't a threat anymore. It was a promise. Foreclosure proceedings had begun, and with no access to funds, Sierra could do nothing but scream and blame. Nathan packed a single duffel bag and left quietly in the middle of the night. He texted Helen, "Once I'm sorry." No follow-up, no reply. But Helen didn't need words. She needed action, and that's exactly what she focused on. In a small corner of the Pacific Northwest, the Quiet Foundation began its first renovation project on a 2-acre wooded retreat, her old family cabin. Claire sent her photos every few days. Hand-built raised beds, a new roof line, a circle of hammocks beneath the cedar trees where women gathered each morning with coffee and quiet joy. It wasn't branded, it wasn't monetized, it was human. The first group of residents were women like Helen, dismissed caregivers, overworked mothers and daughters who had been told to stay silent and smile. They cooked together, they replanted gardens, they read in silence. Helen visited once under the radar without fanfare. She wore a hat and sunglasses and spent the afternoon repainting the porch swing that still had her initials carved into the armrest. One of the women, unaware of who she was, said, "This place makes me feel like my voice matters again." Helen smiled, not for credit but for confirmation. Then came the letter, A thin envelope postmarked from Portland addressed in Sierra's careful cursive. Inside a single handwritten apology, shallow and performative. Sierra asked for another chance for peace, if not forgiveness, citing her stress, her fear of losing everything, and how she never meant to hurt anyone. At the bottom, she'd included a note scribbled in haste. P.S. The necklace you gave me, I didn't know it meant that much. Helen held the letter for less than a minute before folding it neatly and sliding it into the shredder. Some things didn't need a reply. Some bridges weren't burned. They were never built with love to begin with. Back online, the conversation had shifted. News outlets picked up the leaked trust documents and posted anonymous exposés on intergenerational wealth entitlement and legal protection for aging parents. A think piece titled, "The Matriarch Strikes Back," went viral. Helen's name was never mentioned directly, but those who knew her story recognized every line. She didn't seek revenge, it concluded. She reclaimed dignity. Meanwhile, Sierra had lost her contract with a wellness brand she used to endorse. Her passive-aggressive quotes about energy, vampires, and boundaries rang hollow in the face of proven fraud and manipulation. Her social media following plummeted, brand deals evaporated, and whispers circulated about a pending IRS audit connected to the shell company Helen's lawyers had traced months ago. One Reddit user wrote, "She faked brunch and fumbled a dynasty. The internet didn't forget, and neither did Helen." At her cottage in Windmere Bay, Helen lit a lavender candle and poured herself a glass of aged Chardonnay. The sound of the ocean beyond her windows was constant and soft, like breath. No knocks, no noise, just peace. The phone on her counter buzzed with a new voicemail, this time from a journalist requesting an anonymous interview about estate planning and family boundaries. She let it ring out. She didn't need the spotlight. She had already won in silence. The truth had unfolded without a single raised voice. Helen didn't wake up with a sense of triumph. She woke up with the weightless calm of someone who no longer had to prove herself. The sun filtered gently through the linen curtains of her Windmere Bay cottage, casting quiet shapes on the wooden floor. Outside, the ocean murmured against the rocky shore like a lullaby for the past. She brewed her coffee slowly, not because she had nowhere to be, but because she had finally designed a life where being still wasn't a luxury. It was the point. She sat at her writing desk, the same one she'd used for years to make grocery lists, knit patterns, and unsent letters to Nathan. This morning, there was only one envelope on the table. Not from Sierra, not from a lawyer, from Claire. Inside was a photo, the newly renovated porch at the women's retreat painted a soft blue, the swing now framed with blooming lavender. Beneath the photo was a short note in Claire's unmistakable, humble handwriting. "They're calling this the Quiet Queen's Porch. Thought you'd like to know? Thank you for believing women deserve more than survival." Helen touched the paper as if it were something sacred. It was never about revenge. It was about repair. Later that afternoon, she visited her bank to finalize the last piece of her legacy, a grant program under the Quiet Foundation for single mothers returning to school after domestic upheaval. The paperwork was simple. The impact would be anything but. The banker, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and steady hands, asked if she'd like the plaque in the foundation's office to bear her name. Helen thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. No. Just right, in honor of the women who weren't too loud, just unheard. As she signed the final documents, she felt no fireworks, no surge of power, only peace. A quiet end to a story that had for so long tried to rewrite her as disposable. The final loose thread came not through a message or a visit, but through the slow unraveling of Sierra's online presence. Within a month, her Instagram account went private. Her podcast went on indefinite hiatus. A blurry photo of her appeared in a gossip column alone, standing outside a closed door of a co-working space. Phone pressed to her ear, expression hollow. Rumors swirled about her divorce, filing the IRS investigation, and a failed attempt to sue for emotional distress. The case didn't even make it past the preliminary hearing. It turns out paper trails beat public pity every time Nathan, for his part, had taken a job in upstate New York. He sent one final email months later. "I see it now. I hope it's not too late." Helen didn't respond. Not because she hated him, because she loved herself enough to stop being a landing pad for his regrets. That fall, Helen's 70th birthday came and went without a single card from the people who once called her mother. But the table at her coastal villa was full. Claire, Tess, Rachel, and a few women from the retreat who'd become family. By choice, not birth. They brought no gifts, just presents. Laughter floated above the food, not forced, not curated for social media. Real, imperfect, joyful noise. Helen raised her glass and made no speech. She didn't need to. The life she had reclaimed spoke louder than any toast that night alone in her room. She opened her fireproof box and placed one last document inside a letter addressed to whoever needs to read this after I'm gone. It wasn't a will that had already been settled. It was a record of the choices she made, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. The final lines read, "If you find yourself underestimated, dismissed, or erased, remember, silence is not weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is simply waiting until everyone else stops shouting long enough to listen." The next morning, she walked down to the shore. The tide was pulling back gently, dragging decades of noise with it. She didn't look behind her. She didn't need to. The legacy she'd written couldn't be unfriended, unfollowed, or undone. She had become something more than a mother, more than a name in someone else's narrative. She had become her own ending, and it was built not in anger but in architecture. They blocked her number, but she signed the final chapter in ink and legal seal, and in the full unwavering weight of silence that no one could revoke. Some people mistake silence for weakness, until that silence writes the final will, seals the final deed, and delivers the lesson no one forgets. This wasn't revenge. It was a reminder. Dignity doesn't shout, but it never forgets. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a warning, a truth, leave us a comment. Would you have done what Margaret did or gone even further? Share your thoughts below and don't let these stories vanish in silence. Subscribe to Grandma Revenge Silent, where every whisper of justice becomes a roar no one can ignore.